Hello guys, how's it going? Okay, so in this video I'm going to walk you through creating this JavaScript application that fetches the data from the GitHub API and then displays it right here on the screen. Okay, so before we dive into it, I'm just going to give you a quick demo of how it works. So right there I've got an input field, and if I type in a username, let's say I type in John, and then I press search, I get this live results from the GitHub API. Now, in this case, the username is John, so his name is John Megra. Um, he has 44 repositories, his username is John, and this is the URL to his GitHub profile. So this is a fairly basic application. There's really not a lot of functionality to it. There's only a few functions that we create. We make an API call function, and then we set an event listener to a button to fetch the data from the API, and we just grab a few DOM elements from index.html. So if you are a intermediate to advanced level developer, then you probably are not going to learn much from this video. But if you are somebody who is just getting started with JavaScript and you want to create something more meaningful, you wanna get out of the world of variables, if-else statements, functions, loops, and you want to create something more real world, then I believe that this is a good starting point. Okay, now the original application that I created was in React. I was testing out a API library that I'm currently working on, and then I created this application and I posted it to Instagram. And then I had a few people message me saying that they would love to create something like this. So I thought I would just make a quick tutorial and walk you through how I created this application. Now for this one, I've decided to go with plain JavaScript. I'm not using any libraries, no jQuery, no React, no magic, just plain old JavaScript. Okay, so before we dive into it, I want you to go to this link. That's github.com/settings/apps/new, and you need to register something called API tokens or an API key. So because GitHub needs to know who is trying to access the data from their website, and the only way for them to know is if you register your application and you obtain a token or an API key, and then you inject it into your code, and then when you make the API call, that's how GitHub knows that you are trying to access the data from their website. Okay, so it's a fairly basic process. There's all you need to do is you need to type in a name there. For me it's git fetch, but you can type in whatever you want. Just this is optional, and right there you can just fill out localhost /3000, something like that, or and then just you can leave you can copy paste the same thing there. See, when I created this, I just typed in this address, so you can do the same if you want. And once you're done that, just click on create GitHub application, and then you will receive a couple of tokens which should yeah, and then you can just copy and paste them into your code editor and you should be good to go. Okay, now let's get started with the actual application. So I'm going to close my browser, I'm going to close my terminal, and this is the folder that we are going to start with. I'll make sure to add this into my video description so you guys can download it, and this is the starter files. So I'm going to go ahead and open this into my code editor, which is VS Code, no surprise there, and I'm going to enlarge it, and in here I've already got the basic markup and the styling down, so you don't have to watch me create any of this. Now before we dive into it, I just want you to know that I expect you to have a basic understanding of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Okay, so all this right there shouldn't look too foreign to you. In the main file, I've only got one wrapper div, and Then I've got a container class, which is a bootstrap class. And then I've got a row class, and in there I've got the title and the subtitle. And then I've got another div in which I have an input, and then I've got a span tag, and this is what contains the button that we're going to use to search. And then I've got another div, and in there I've got all this I've got these tiny containers which are going to contain all the information that we receive from the GitHub API. So we are going to use JavaScript to dynamically insert data right into these tiny containers. Okay. Next up, I've got a Sass folder which contains all the styling. So in the base folder, I've got a base.scss which contains all the basic settings for the web page. I've got a mixins file which contains all the media queries. I've got a variables file which contains this main yellow color that I'm going to be using throughout the page. And I've got a modules folder, and in there I've got a button file which contains the styling for the button. And then I've got a main CSS file which basically contains everything, all the styling for the web page. And then I've got the main container CSS file, and this is where I import everything that I'm using. Okay, and next up I've got this JavaScript file, and this is where I have already selected the DOM elements that I'm going to need. So let me just walk you through. And these are those two tokens that I was talking about that you need to register from GitHub before you use their API. So make sure you have these down, otherwise it's not going to work. Okay. Now let me just walk you through these. First up, I've got the input value. So if I open index.html, this is the ID search for this input. So this is what we are going to use to type in our username. Okay. Next up, I've got a search button, which is this right there. After that, I've got the name container, which is this right there. Okay. And after that, I've got the username container, which is the one right next to it. And after that, I've got the repository container and then the URL container. Okay, so next up, let's actually create a function in JavaScript. But before we do that, we have something called package.json in there. And if you don't know what package.json is, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it just basically contains the dependencies that we are going to use for this project. So in this case, I've got Bootstrap and I've got Node.Sass. And Node.Sass is a package that converts that compiles the SCSS into normal browser readable CSS. So this is what the compiled output looks like. As you can see, it's just a bunch of files right there. Okay, so open up this project in your terminal and type in npm install. What this is going to do is it's going to include a node modules folder. As you can see, it's right there, and this is where it installs these two dependencies that we have included right there. Okay, that's all it does. That's all this command is doing. Okay, now that this is installed, I want you to install something called a live server as well. So a live server is basically going to launch your project into a virtual server, and it's going to allow you to view the changes in real time as soon as you hit save on the file. So to install it, just type in npm install live-server-g. Now this -g stands for global. It's a global flag, which means that it's going to install this package on your machine globally, so you can use this command live server anywhere or on your machine or in any project. So now within this Git, I already have this installed, so I don't really have to, but once you've tapped this command, just press enter and it should just do this automatically. So once you've got that installed, staying in the git fetch folder, type in live-server. Once you press enter, it's automatically going to launch a server, which in my case is this one right there. And this is what we have. So this is what all the compiled styles, the index.html looks like. Okay, so currently if I type in the search button, nothing is going to happen because there is no JavaScript to make it work. And another thing that you might want to do, that's optional, but if you want to change the CSS, if you want to change the styles of the web page, then you have to run this command, npm start. What this is going to do is it's going to look for this command in package.json, and this is going to run this command, and this is what converts our SCSS into normal CSS. Okay, and like I said, this is optional. You don't really have to do it, but if you want to change the styling of this web page, then you're going to have to run this command and then make the changes in the files. Okay, so now let's actually get working on our project. So open up app.js. So let's just make sure that this is working. Everything is set up correctly. So first of all, I'm going to grab this search button right there, and I'm going to set an event listener to it, and I'm going to listen to the click property. So I'm going to type in click, and I'm going to set a callback, and in there I'm just going to console.log something, and I'm going to say hello. Okay, let's see if that works. Just open up your developer tools. It's Command Alt I on a Mac. So if I type this, and it's not saying hello, and I wonder why is that. Oh, I need to press the button. Right, there we go. So if I press the button, I get hello. Okay, so everything is set up correctly. Now I'm going to leave this function right there as it is for now. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a function that's going to be responsible for making the API call. Okay, so let's just do that. Type in const, and I'm going to call this function fetch user. Fetch users actually, and this is going to be an arrow function. We are going to be using the ES6 syntax extensively in this course because, let's be honest, ES5 is pretty much dead now. Okay, so in this function, the first thing I'm going to do is, if you are new to JavaScript, then it's going to sound a bit weird to you, but I'm going to use something called async await. Now, async await is one of the newer features in JavaScript, and basically it's just Ajax on steroids. Now, if you don't know Ajax, Ajax is a library that we used to use in the previous versions of JavaScript to make HTTP calls. Now, Ajax was really a pain to work with because you had to first instantiate the XML object, and then you had to call a bunch of methods on it like onload, save, send. It was just a pain in the ass really. But watch how easy async await makes it to make a HTTP request. So just before you declare a function, type in async right there, and I'm gonna give this function an argument called user, and we will use this argument in a moment, so just follow along for now. It will make sense later on. Okay, now in this function I'm gonna create another constant called API underscore call. Now this is where we are going to use the async await functionality. So right there I'm gonna type await, and to make the API call I'm gonna use something called the fetch API. Now the fetch API is another new feature in the latest version of JavaScript, and it just makes API calls or HTTP calls a piece of cake. So the way this works is you instantiate the function, and then within there you just type in the URL. In this case I'm going to use the ES6 template strings, which are pretty much just the normal strings, but in template strings, you can inject the variables that you have defined in your files. So I'll show what that means in a minute. So for now, just follow along and type in this URL: https://api.github.com/users, and then /, and now I'm going to inject this variable right there. So /$ curly braces user. There we go. And now this is going to get followed by these two tokens right there. So I'm going to throw in a query string sign there, and then I'm going to say client underscore ID equals, and then I'm going to copy this, which the value of which is this right there. And then after that, I'm going to add a ampersand symbol, and then I'm going to say client underscore secret equals, and then I'm going to inject this one right there, just like so. Now, in previous versions of JavaScript, you would do the same thing in this way. So you would have to type in all these URLs like this, and then you would have to do something like just make the break and then plus client ID, something like that, and then plus, and then follow along with the string. So this was a pain in the ass, but look how neat this is in template strings. Okay, now this is something that I have opened in my web browser already. So if I type in api.github.com/users, I get this in return. So this is just a sample URL. This returns me with the first 100 users that it can find on the website. So in this case, it returns me with an array, and then the array contains an object, and this object has key value pairs. As you can see, it's login, and you can access these values to spit out the data on the web page, and that is exactly what we are going to do. Okay, so now that we have our URL set up, let's just do something else. Now I'm going to create another constant, and I'm going to call this, let's call it data, and in there I'm going to convert whatever comes back from this call to JSON format. Now if you don't know what JSON is, it stands for JavaScript Object Notation, and it converts the data that comes back from API into readable code that any programming language can understand. That's all JSON is. Well, this is a very basic definition, but if you want to learn more about it, just type in the Google and you will get plenty of information on this. Okay, now that we have converted this into JSON, and this is another neat method in that Fetch API provides. Usually you would have to do something like json.parse or json.stringify and then pass in the variable like this, but watch how neat the Fetch API makes this. All you have to do is you just have to pass the you just have to call the JSON method on whatever you want to convert to the JSON format. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to return an object and I'm going to give it a key called data, and I'm going to set this value to what we get back from this constant right there. So returning an object, calling the key data, and then setting its value to this constant right there. Now another neat ES6 feature is that if in an object the value and the key and the value's names are the same, then all you can do is you can just return this. This is the exact same as saying return data and set its value to data. But since these two names are the same, you don't really have to type in. It's just to make your code a little more neat, you can say. But you don't really have to do this. It's just some syntactical sugar in JavaScript. If it was something like data's, then you would have to actually assign it like this, because these two names are different. But since it's the same name, you don't really have to worry about it, so you can just leave it like this. Okay, so now this function is what's going to fetch the data from the API. But we have only declared this function. We have not actually called it anywhere. So currently nothing really is going to happen. Now the next thing that we are going to do is we are going to create another function, and that function is going to call this function inside of it. Okay, so I'm going to call this function show data, and this is where the magic is going to happen. Const show data equals to another function, and in this case we don't really need any arguments, so I'm just going to leave it blank. Okay, now in there I'm going to call this function fetch users. Okay, now fetch users obviously takes an argument. So what's the argument that I need to pass in there? Let's think about it. Right there is the user. This user is going right there. Now this means that whatever goes in there is going to be the name of the user. And where are we going to type in the name of the user? Right there, into this input field that we have defined. So this is exactly what we are going to fetch. First of all, I'm going to just copy this and I'm going to paste it there. But this alone is not enough. We need to access the value of this input. So I'm going to call this input value dot value. Now whatever we type in there, it's going to get added into this URL right there, because this user is this argument, and then this argument gets converted into the input value when we call this function right here. So hopefully that makes sense. Now when we call the function from async await, we need to attach something called promises. Now if you don't know what promises are, then I am not going to describe them, because promises are just a bit of a complex topic. So if you want to learn about promises, there's tons of resources out there. You can Google them, you can watch tutorials on YouTube, but I'm not going to go into too much detail, because this is if I try to explain promises, then it's going to get a very long video. Okay, so for now just follow along and watch the magic happen. Okay, so to instantiate a promise, you type in .then. Now into this .then call, I'm going to give it an argument. I'm going to call it res, or response, or results, whatever you want to call it. And then this is going to open up a function. And for now, let's just console.log and see what we actually get back. Okay, but this is not going to work right now, because again, we have called this function right there, but this function, which actually calls this function, has not been called anywhere. Now where do I want to call this function? I want to call this function as soon as the search button is clicked. So right there I'm going to say show data. Okay, now let's see if this works. So I'm just going to type in a username again. Let's just call it John, and if I press search, let's see what we get back. Okay, there we go, it's working. So we get back a data object. So if you remember, we set the data property right there, and this is exactly what we are getting back. Now on this data object, we have a bunch of properties that we can use to work with this API. Now in this case, we are going to use the name property, the login property, the what else? The public repos property, and then the last one is going to be the HTML URL property. Now these are the 4 ones that we are going to work with. Now once we have done this, now it's just a matter of calling this, setting the values into this HTML file. So all we need to do is we need to grab these, we need to put them there, and then we need to set their inner HTML properties to whatever we want to display from the API. Okay, so for now I'm going to leave the console.log statement because we are going to use this to access the values. So let's just do that now. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the name container, and I'm going to paste it there, and then I'm going to use the inner HTML JavaScript method, and I'm going to set it to a template string, and then I'm going to set name. This is what's going to get displayed on the screen, just right about there. Okay, name equals span, and this span has a class of, I think it's main underscore profile dash value. Now if you don't know what this class means, in this index.html file I've got one class called main profile dash key, and the key is the name. So this is going to be, I think, a yellow color, and then in there I'm defining a class dash value, and this is going to be a white color. So these classes are just for styling purposes. It's nothing specific to JavaScript. Okay, now since we are using template strings, that means I can inject the variables. So in this case I've got a response variable, so I'm going to say response dot data, which is this property, dot, and then in this object the first thing that I'm going to use is the name property, so response dot data dot name. Okay, now let's see if that works. So if I say John, and there we go, we get their name, John Megra. Excellent. Okay, now next up is just a matter of setting the values of the rest of the variables right there. So the next one is the UN, or the username container. So I'm going to do the same with this dot inner HTML equals, and I'm just going to copy this actually, and I'm going to paste it right there. I'm going to say username equals span plus as res.data dot. Okay, so what's the username property? I think it's login. Yeah, it's login. So res.data.login. Now next up we need the repository container, so I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this, and I'm going to change this to repositories container, and I'm going to set this to repos. And now what's the property for the repos? It's come on, where are you? Public repos, right there. So public underscore repos, this is what we're going to use. So res.data.public underscore repos. There we go. And the last one that we need is the URL container. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, and I'm going to paste it right there. So I'm going to say URL container equals URL, change this to URL, and now what do we need? What property do we need to access the URL? Let's type in John again, and we get the data back, and there we go, HTML URL. Okay, so I'm just going to change this to HTML underscore URL. Okay, and now I'm going to get rid of this console.log statement because we don't need this anymore. So now if I refresh the browser and I type in a username, John, and if I search for it, there we go. This is all that we needed. Now if I type in a different username, I'm just going to type in my name, Hamza, and there we go. So this is working brilliantly. This is all that we needed to create, really. There is a bunch of more functionality that you can add to this application just by using the GitHub's API. So for example, you can display the user's picture, you can display the user's bio, you can make a check. If there is no user, you can just display an error message. There's a bunch you can do. Like I said, this is just a very basic application, and I just wanted to show, I created this for beginners to show them how to work with APIs and JavaScript. So if you found this video helpful, then please do let me know, And if you want me to create some more of these, some more of the tutorials, then give me a shout on Instagram, send me a DM, or leave a comment, and I will see what I can do. So I hope you liked this video, and I hope you learned something from this, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.